Okay, so this is a few minutes to give you a bit of background on MARXAN and zonation and some spatial planning tools. This might end up being a little choppy, but we'll see how it goes. So this slide is here just to remind me to say that the Nature Conservancy started in the 1970s their science program, and it was around this idea of building natural heritage data, fundamentally finding out where things are, making spatial records of the distribution of biological diversity, and using this as a way of prioritizing where they acted, where they're going to purchase lands. And they had what was called then a scorecard approach, and you can think about a scorecard approach as basically summing up the number of elements of interest for conservation in a location, ranking them, and going after the things with the highest scorecard. It was more nuanced than that, but not a lot. And so here's a paper from 2006 trying to evaluate the degree to which these Florida Natural Areas Inventory, the Florida Natural Heritage Program, how they did relative to what they could have done by following this scorecard approach. But the problem there is that it doesn't think about complementarity of sites. And so here's a diagram or a table from, I think, the MARXAN tutorial, and it shows the problem fairly simply, that if you had a suite of 9 or 10 different species down the 9 different rows, the 10 different rows, and you had a suite of A through H in terms of sites, that you can document how many species or targets of conservation are in how many sites. And so you can rank them from, say, the macroalgae that's found in the most number of sites, 7, down to the sea lion colony, which is found in 1. And you can also rank sites by the number of different elements that they capture, from 8 at site A to 3 at site H. And if you were just to use a pure scorecard approach, what you'd do is you'd try and capture site A first, and site B second, and site C third, and so on down the line. And the last thing you'd do is capture site H. However, if there is a covariation between site A and site B such that they captured many of the same species, by adding site B to the pool, you may be adding relatively few new targets to your conservation pool. And so an alternative would be to, say, choose 2 different sites, neither of which had the highest species richness, but that together they were most complementary, and as a consequence captured the most biological diversity that you could. And this is this idea of complementarity. And so MARXAN works on trying to achieve efficiency. In other words, you want to collect things into a reserve system that allows you to take the fewest number of elements to meet your objectives. Focus on complementarity. Think about how distributions of things are distributed across sites so as to not be redundant. Comprehensiveness. You want to be able to achieve all of your conservation goals that you enunciate. So if, for example, for these 10 entities, you'd want to capture all 10 of them, and that you can do this with a variety of different potential reserves, but C and E does it with a minimum set of just 2 of those sites. Adequacy, that you might want to think about how many of the different entities that you need to conserve, and so maybe that you would be trying to capture at least 2 of each of these attributes, and in which case you might have a different set of reserves. Or you might say, well, really we need 2 macroalgae and granite reefs, but maybe we need 3 of the seagrass Poseidonia, whatever. Anyway, of different attributes. So you could vary the number of different attributes that you'd want to have to be adequate in terms of conserving the diversity and representativeness. So you want to also make sure that you're capturing things across taxonomic and functional groups so that you're protecting sea lions as well as mangroves, etc., etc. Okay, so it's trying to achieve those goals in setting up a series of reserves. That's the way it was designed, thinking about this idea of complementarity. MARXAN and ZONATION both strive to achieve this goal. MARXAN and ZONATION do it do it fundamentally differently. So MARXAN attempts to minimize the cost while achieving the objective. So cost can be in the number of reserves that you put into the portfolio or into the design plan, and that was the case in the previous slide. But costs can also be scored differentially. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, they don't need to cost the same number of dollars, and so you could be using the cost of those reserves in terms of how much they might actually cost to protect. So this could be dollars or the minimum number of units. It also tries to minimize, misspelled there, sorry, the boundary length. So it recognizes that having a highly pixelated reserve system is not very helpful, and that there are edge effects, and so it creates something called the boundary length modifier, and you can penalize the solution if it becomes out as over pixelated, and therefore you might find a solution that might cost a little bit more but is more bounded and has larger patches. So those are the things that we'll be fiddling with in our tutorials, thinking about cost and boundary length mostly, and also the number of attributes that you want to protect, and then thinking about how that varies solutions. Zonation is another software tool. So MARXAN was developed out of the University of Queensland, and Hugh Possingham's group is managing it there, and it is freely available, and they run a help group, and so it's a fairly popular tool that's used. Ahti Moilanen in Finland is also interested in these sorts of questions and created Zonation. Now, if you go onto the Zonation website, it's recently been they said they're taking it down, but it is another approach to thinking about efficient solutions to designing reserves. However, what Zonation does is it identifies sites from the most to the least expendable. For example, a paper that Moilanen did a couple years back using Zonation said if you take fens or peat bogs in Finland and you're concerned about peatland extraction and the impact of peatland extraction on birds, could you identify the suite of birds and some kind of attributes of adequacy and representation that conserve those birds, set those criteria, and then identify which of the bogs that you'd want to remove from the pool of habitat first, second, third, fourth, fifth, etc., until you get down to minimally capturing the conservation objective. And so it's whereas MARXAN's building from the bottom up, starting with nothing and saying what do you want to add into that solution, Zonation starts with the landscape and takes things away until you get down to the boundary of not being able to meet those the objectives. Both, if I go back one, you can see that looking at this size of a problem with 2, 4, 6, 8 different potential reserves and 10 different species, you can look to at the matrix and pick an optimal solution. But if you had, say, a landscape with 1,000 different potential pixels or 25 different species, it becomes not just unavailable to a solution through a visual assessment, it becomes mathematically intractable again. So both MARXAN and Zonation use complex machine learning approximations for problems that are not analytically tractable. So MARXAN, what we'll hear from Patrick, uses simulated annealing, basically looking for solution landscapes and randomly trying different ones and trying to move up that the efficiency landscape by changing it. Okay, so this is a spatial planning tool, sort of a where to do conservation, and this is a picture of Bob Pressey, who's at the University of Townsville, or let's see, well, no, James Cook University in Townsville, Australia, and in 2000, Margulis and Pressey wrote a paper on systematic conservation planning. There's been a lot of literature on systematic conservation planning, and there's some a little bit of, I guess, well, flux in what people think of as systematic conservation planning. So you'll see a lot of systematic conservation planning that simply entails running a MARXAN solution for a problem. And whereas I would say that Bob Pressey would say that that's not it. That it involves not just this idea of running a computer simulation of a solution, but also engaging people in the process of thinking about those solutions. And so just these two final slides, they may be a little bit hard to read, and you may want to stop and pause and take a look at this for a moment. But Margulis and Pressey in 2000 had a stages in systematic conservation planning, and these are really kind of data driven. So you compile the data on the biodiversity of a planning region, you identify conservation goals for the planning region, you review existing conservation areas. One of the things about MARXAN is you can seed it with areas that are already in that you don't have to acquire in terms of making an efficient design for a reserve system. You select additional conservation areas and then you implement it. Great. That sounds as if it's easy peasy. And after publishing this paper, there was a bit of a literature on whether this is really the way that conservation happens, or are conservation additions usually more fortuitous. The president of a country decides they like monkeys, and so they set aside a national park for monkeys or something like that. And so opportunism versus planning became a debate about conservation strategies. But Bob Pressey has actually walked the walk and talked the talk in quite a lot of different places, and tried to apply this process of systematic conservation planning to problems on the ground. And as a consequence, much more recently, this is I think about 2012 or so, Pressey and Madeline Botrill, who's now McKelvey or something. She changed her last name. She works for Conservation International. Is now, in fact, next week moves to San Francisco. So we'll be in the area. We'll try and get her up here. They modified that original process. So you still see, so now you see scoping and costing the planning process, identifying and involving stakeholders, identifying the context for conservation areas, identifying the conservation goals. It still has assembling the data and setting the targets and selecting additional conservation areas. So it's building out the Margulis and Pressey model, but it's building it out with this idea that you're going to have to involve stakeholders, that people who live in the area have something to say about it, and it may be that the most efficient solution requires getting site C and E, but it might be that site C is an absolute non-starter from the perspective of the local communities, that there is some other values, non-conservation values, that make that prohibitive from putting into the conservation portfolio, and so therefore maybe doing C and B would be the better solution, or C, B, and G. I don't know what it would be, but and so now this systematic conservation planning, as per Bob Pressey, involves a lot of what we see in the lower right of this slide, is people sitting around computers using MARXAN as a tool to think about alternative strategies. And one of the things that's emerged as a consequence of this has been something called MARXAN with zones, where the idea is that you can create different kinds of value parameters. And so it may be that you have a set of values that you're trying to protect a species in reserves, but you might have another table that suggests where and why you need lands for grazing or forest management or urban development or whatever. Alternatively, you can also think about different ways of conserving things, and so you could have a marine area that has a no fishing zone, a partial fishing zone, and a fishing zone. And so you can have zones of different kinds of land use activities in them rather than strictly a reserve or not a reserve. Okay, so that's a quick background. I said 10 minutes. It's going to be 15 minutes, but there you go. So this will give us a little bit of background for working with Patrick on Monday on doing an example with MARXAN. See you then.